Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock local time. I'd like to welcome you all to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, October 21st. I welcome all our staff and our guests in attendance today, either in person or virtually, as well as those who will view these proceedings at a later date. I'm Councillor Richard Novak, and I am joined today by my colleagues. From my far left, Mayor McNeil Smith, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and from my right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. I'd first like to acknowledge that we're privileged to live, work, and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Wasanic nations, the Pakwachin, Sartlip, Sakum, Saut, and Malahat, whose stewardship of these lands and waters from time immemorial have allowed us to flourish here today. I'll now call for approval of the agenda, or if any changes are needed. Councillor Duck, Mayor McNeil Smith, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? None. Agenda is approved as published. And we now turn to the public participation period. This section of the agenda allows members of the public to speak to any of the items on the agenda. Today, public participation is limited to those agenda items which do not have dedicated presentation components, and both items 7A and 7B have such components. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to 4 minutes. So I will ask for the first time if there is anyone who wishes to address the committee. We'll get to the development permit application shortly. I'll ask for a second time. Is there anybody who wishes to address the committee? And a third time, seeing no one, we'll close the public participation period for now. And I'll now ask for approval of the minutes of the regular Committee of the Whole meeting of October 7th, 2024. Councillor Duck, Mayor McNeil Smith. Any discussion, changes, additions, deletions? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. The minutes are approved. There's no presentations for item 6, so we'll move right away to item 7, our development permit applications. The first one, A, Development Variance Permit Application number DV100361 at 2104 Colinwood Road to relax Subdivision and Development Bylaw requirements to allow overhead wiring for a new single-family dwelling. And I believe we have a presentation from the applicants, Tony and Cheryl Burchick. Did I get that correct? Thank you. Please come up to the podium, and if you wouldn't mind pressing the button at the base of the microphone so that we can hear you.
When you use the clicker, just point it at the computer.
Thank you. So my name is Tony Burchick. I'm here with my wife Cheryl. We're here to speak to you tonight about 2104 Colinwood. So we purchased this property in September of 2023 to build our retirement home and be closer to our grandkids. And after living in Saanich for over 26 years. We are not a builder, we're not a developer. However, we have built a few homes in the past. We were shocked to learn at the midpoint of construction after the insulation inspection that the on-site wiring that we had installed on the underground wiring we installed on site also had to be installed underground off-site. We thought we had met the bylaw. Following day, we contacted BC Hydro, initiated the process for the underground wiring. In April, we submitted the AutoCAD drawing that they required. We paid the $2,000 fee. On May 24th, 6 months and 11 days after we poured footings, we received conditional occupancy. And subsequently, we moved in shortly thereafter. In July, BC Hydro informed us that that the work to put the wiring underground off-site is significant. They indicated that their work alone was probably close to $20,000, as we indicated in the letter that we provided to you. And then once you include Telus' costs, our on-site costs to make the adjustment, we're looking at $30,000 to place the wiring underground off-site. After the town told us that we had to place this wiring underground, we noticed in our neighborhood that there were a number of homes, new homes, that had overhead power, overhead wiring. And so this map here shows our house is the blue star, the blue circle with the white star, and there was 4 in the immediate area. That's all. You know, we didn't go looking, driving around town. We just saw these 4. There was 2 right around the corner at Bower Bank and Rest Haven, 1 on Colinwood, and then 1 on Old Bay. So this is the one on Bower Bank. It shows the overhead wiring for both on-site and off-site, and you can see there's two service connections for this one on Bower Bank. And then there's this one on Rest Haven just around the corner, same thing. The on-site and off-site is overhead wiring. And so we understand from the staff report and during our discussions with staff that a variance was granted for these 2. And so the town, from what we understand, the town granted the variance because technical issues required a new pole to service the 2-lot subdivision underground. The town indicated that this new pole would unreasonably impact the community in a negative way. Our situation is very similar, except worse. The poor condition of the community power system requires significant upgrades at the expense of one property owner. Imposing these costs onto one single-family property is inequitable. We wouldn't have applied for this variance if BC Hydro kept the community infrastructure in better condition. And so then we look at the one in Colinwood, just at the end of the block from us. This one as well is overhead wiring for the on-site and off-site. And one thing to note about this particular picture, aside from that, and in this particular one, the staff had, and we asked, well, why is this one overhead? And they indicated it was an oversight. So another issue, or another thing to point out with this picture, you'll see there's a brand new hydro pole there. That hydro pole was installed, it replaced the existing hydro pole when they developed a 6-lot subdivision. That's actually would be behind us in this picture. Developed a 6-lot subdivision. And if today, if you were to allocate those costs to each of those 6 lots, they're probably looking at about $2,500. We're being asked to pay 10 times that. So then if you look at this one at Albay, which is very interesting, it's a very recent build. It's almost identical to our situation, except it's a little bit more complicated. It has on-site underground wiring just like us. It has a service pole, and if they use the same contractor as us, the service pole costs about $2,000. The difference is they've got overhead wiring that extends across the street and goes down the road. It's probably like 18 to 20 meters long. And because the service is so long overhead, they had to install a guy wire, which you can barely see here, but you can see it on this next photo. You can see the guy wire to support the service pole. And then this picture here shows the actual overhead wiring. And if you look at how to connect this underground, they would have had to cross the road at the location of the service pole and come towards us into the picture. That builder probably saved between $20,000 and $25,000 because he didn't have to put that underground. And so when we asked about this one, again, the staff said it was an oversight. So then this is a picture showing the original house that we had purchased back in September. It had overhead wiring, extensive overhead wiring. It had a service pole. So we got rid of all of that overhead wiring. The service pole was rotten, so we relocated it to the corner of the property. And like I said, we thought we met the bylaw by doing that. And then this is our property here. It shows a picture of the completed house. There's no overhead wiring. Here's another picture showing it from a different angle. It shows the exact same pole as Albay, like I indicated. And you can see the short wiring that connects us to the on-site overhead. 3 meters about for the power, and the cable comes a little longer. And that shows the pole there that needs to be replaced. And so this drawing, this picture here shows, it gives an indication of the work required. So you see our service pole there by the fire hydrant. We'd have to, BC Hydro would have to trench from that location through our neighbor's exposed aggregate driveway, just to the other side of the pole, install a junction box. There's the pilaster in the picture there of the pole that is in the wrong location, but that BC Hydro told us that we have to pay for to move that pilaster. And there's the pole that needs to be replaced. And if you look at the pole and the extensive wiring on that, that's a major job to put in a new pole and reconnect all that, and to look at the transformer. Hopefully the transformer is in good condition that it can be transferred over. And so then we just had some comments about, additional information to help council that isn't in the staff report, but things that we thought of from our perspective that would help support our variance. So I'm just going to read them because I want to be succinct about it. BC Hydro recommended that and I'm going to read it in terms of it's written in your staff report. I'm not going to use me or us. BC Hydro recommended that the applicant seek a variance because of the extensive work required to construct off-site underground wiring. They deemed the existing installation as an acceptable power service and said the applicant has done their part to install the underground wiring on-site, and the applicant is ready to connect when the community power service is installed underground. Another point, the town should not require the applicant to pay for the costs associated with removing and replacing the existing pilaster that was likely permitted by the town and installed incorrectly by TELUS. Installing a new pole benefits BC Hydro and the rest of the properties on Colinwood Road, and it extends the longevity of the community overhead system, which is counterintuitive to the town's beautification goal to have the overhead wire placed underground. And this one here we felt was very important. The town required the applicant to place a flood hazard covenant on their property, which requires their main floor living area to be above the estimated flood elevation and does not allow the installation of electrical equipment below that elevation. A flood event would submerge the proposed junction box that BC Hydro said was required for the underground wiring. To us, this doesn't make any sense. The junction box waterproofing could deteriorate over time or get damaged from a lawnmower or other external force like a vehicle or vandalism that would increase the risk of the applicant losing power for an extended period of time after flooding, or even worse, it could cause a short, which could cause a fire and even an explosion in reality. Will BC Hydro and the town guarantee that the junction box won't leak during a flood event? Will the court find the town partially liable for any damage if it does leak? It's a serious issue in our minds, especially since weren't allowed to put any electrical equipment below that elevation. Another point, all of the work required for the on-site underground wiring will occur in the front yard of 2100 Colinwood, our neighbor, including the excavation for the underground wiring, cutting through their exposed aggregate driveway, and installing a new pole, 2 pilasters, and a junction box in their front lawn. Another point, approving the development variance permit would eliminate the carbon emissions associated with the construction of the off-site underground wiring. There's a lot of concrete that needs to be placed, the heavy equipment, the delivery of material. And then a final note with respect to the staff report, BC Hydro and Technical Safety BC have both deemed the applicant's installation as an acceptable power service and is identical to the installation shown on Allenby Road. And in closing, we are here today because of the large sum of money the town requires us to pay for a community mandate to beautify neighborhoods by requiring new builds to install off-site underground wiring. What will this money pay for? A hydro pole for our 20 neighbors in BC Hydro to maintain the overhead electrical service, which doesn't support the community mandate. Removal and replacement of an existing pilaster that was installed incorrectly. A junction box to support future expansion of underground wiring for our neighbors. that will be below a flood elevation. We are not a builder or a developer that can reduce their profit margin or just pass this expense on to a future homeowner. This expense will come right out of our pockets. Our retirement fund will take a big hit. We understand your goal and mandate to place wiring underground, which we support, but there are circumstances that cause significant hardship, like our situation. Imposing these costs onto one single family property is inequitable. We respectfully request that council approve the development variance permit application to advance to the next step in the process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next part of the process is public participation. If there's anybody who wishes to speak to this development variance permit application in the gallery, please come forward now. I'll ask for a second time. If there's anybody who wishes to speak to this specific item. Third time, and we'll call the public participation period closed. We'll now open up to committee to ask questions to the applicant, if there are any. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Please. So I'm just seeking a bit of clarification. So you must have had the home built by a contractor of some sort, correct? Would that be correct?
I was the builder for the house. Yes.
You were the builder for the
Yes.
house. Oh, okay. I thought from your comments you said you weren't really a builder. Okay, so I'm just wondering why, given what was on the building permit, why the temporary pole went up without consulting with town staff before.
And so when I was, I went through when I was building the house, I went through the building regulations bylaw, and that's what I was using really to administer and meet all the requirements of the town. And from my understanding, when I interpret bylaw 5.14, I believe we're meeting it. But where I guess you could say my oversight is that there's a condition that was placed on the building permit by the Director of Engineering that says it has to be to the nearest acceptable pole. The hydro and the communications.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions from committee? None? Thanks. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I need a bit more to kind of understand this. So so you're saying that there wasn't anything in the building regulations that talked about the requirement for it to go underground. It was a condition added onto the building permit.
It was my understanding that, like, when I interpreted 5.14, I thought we were meeting it to the nearest acceptable power service. And so BC Hydro and Technical Safety BC deemed our pole as an acceptable power service because it was, and they're even allowing us to leave it in place, just like Albay's been in place for a number of years. But the condition on the building permit is a little bit different, and that's what was missed.
And so your wiring from your house to the property line is
It's underground, yes.
Is underground.
Yes.
And then it goes up to
That pole, and we deemed that as being an acceptable power service.
Okay. And BC Hydro was happy with that?
Oh, yeah, completely, because it's the same as Albay, and it's the same situation. And it's very typical when you go from underground to overhead to do what we did. Very typical. In many municipalities, it's allowed everywhere. And it's even allowed, well, it's happened in your municipality as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, and thank you for coming and presenting to committee this evening. along with the information that you provided in our agenda package. So when you had the pole installed, was it intended to be temporary or permanent?
Permanent.
Is it installed on your property or on the town boulevard?
It's on our property right at the corner, yeah.
And as you've shown from one of the photographs, there was a similar pole on the property with the previous residence, just located slightly
That's right. There it is
inward
there.
of the property line.
Yeah,
And you've indicated that in the one photograph where you show the both poles, you indicate, that one's fine. So the pole in the foreground, the larger, taller BC Hydro pole, you're indicating if the requirement is met to go from the pole you installed to that pole underground, that pole, BC Hydro pole, has to be replaced?
correct. That's the significant cost of BC Hydro. Because the pole is old, their policy is whoever initiates any work on an old pole, is that person has to pay for it. And so because we're the ones initiating the required connection underground, so they would do a drop service. So the way it would work, if this pole was in good condition, they would just do a drop service, dig a trench to our property line. But since the drop service they need to put in is on an old pole, they said the pole has to be replaced, you have to pay for it.
So at the time that did BC Hydro install the pole that is on your property?
No, I engaged a contractor to do that work. And then they hooked, and once we installed the pole, we had it inspected, and then BC Hydro just came and made the final connection.
So prior to the installation of the pole by a contractor, you had inquired and understood from BC Hydro that would be an acceptable pole?
Yes, that was from my electrician. He said it's typical installation, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for taking the questions.
Any other questions from committee? I have a couple of questions myself. At what point in the process did you discover that what you had done there did not meet the bylaws?
So when we called for insulation inspection, which was midpoint of construction, is when we found out that didn't meet the requirements of the town.
At midpoint?
Yeah,
Okay, so before the house was completed?
correct. And so from that, and because it takes so long to get things done with BC Hydro, their work backlog, it took them till July to bring their scope of work to our attention. And as soon as we found that out, that's when we initiated the variance application. And here we are today, and we had to delay our presentation to you because my wife was away for an extended period, so.
Thank you. That's all from me. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. If you would, have you had a conversation with your neighbor here with the aggregate driveway and as to their reaction?
They're not too happy, yeah. They're not happy.
So I take it from that statement that they're content with the current arrangement versus the prospect
Yes.
of replacing that existing
Yes,
BC
they
Hydro
are.
pole? All right, thank you.
Any other questions from committee? Councillor O'Keefe.
Sorry, so the pole in the foreground, as I understand it, that's where the town wants you to bring your service,
Correct,
and it would have to go underground,
yes.
and it would have to be replaced. But the
Yes.
pole is still gonna be there, so there's still gonna be a pole. So we're not aside from the pole that's in front of your, the one that
Right.
you installed, there's still gonna be a pole.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just the cost is
Yeah,
significant.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you, that's good for me.
Anybody else? No? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We will now ask for the report from our staff on this. Ms. Verhagen?
Good evening. Through the chair, this is a development variance application to vary a requirement in a subdivision and development bylaw. to allow the overhead service to remain on the property, as was just presented by the applicant. There's lots of information in the staff report. I would like to point out that it was listed as a condition in the building permit. When a person applies for a building permit, when they come in to pick it up, after it's been reviewed by staff, there's a number of conditions written on the permit. The property owner or applicant is required to sign the permit to acknowledge that they've read all the conditions and agree to follow them. That was done for this building permit. So it is a requirement both on the building permit as well as in the building bylaw and the subdivision and development bylaw. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. So because this seems to be an application where a whole lot of our utilities would need to be replaced, and the hydro has said they need to replace the pole. Normally when hydro needs to replace the pole, that means they intend to do them eventually. Do we get notified by BC Hydro of when they would actually just be replacing all the poles, like on this street?
That is a great question for engineering staff, although they're not here this evening, so I can find that out and get back to you, but I don't know the answer.
You don't know. I guess the reason I was asking was that this feels like something that if they were going to replace it, that it seemed, is there a mechanism by which, you know, this property owner or future property owner could have a condition where if this came up for replacement, that work could be done at a later date when it would be you know, having to be done by a hydro or TELUS replacing their own infrastructure in the future?
So not every connection underground is straightforward, which is why we encourage people to contact BC Hydro early in their development plans for their property. It does take some time to hear from BC Hydro. We've heard this from property owners, and we've heard costs ranging widely. And what looks very simple to a layperson may require a really complicated rework of the network for electrical connection to a property. We've seen costs range from $2,000 for an underground connection to $30,000. Like, it really ranges, and it's hard to know what it's going to be given any location in Sydney. We have checked if the town is legally allowed to require underground connections, and we are. That is a permitted thing for municipalities to require. Not every municipality requires underground connection for new development like Sydney does, but Sydney's required it for at least 20 years. So this is not a new thing. Over the past 10 years, Sydney's issued or approved 227 new single-family and two-family dwellings through building permits, and this has been a condition on every single one of them.
Am I to understand, so then, if this, say they'd never redeveloped this house, and, well, I guess the pole would have always been there, so Hydro replaces their poles, they just replace it, and it wouldn't have affected any of these properties. Okay, and if they had undergrounded it, they'd replace, no matter what happened, any property owner, when this development came up for redevelopment, was gonna have to bear the full cost of fixing BC Hydro's like making that transition, the extra cost of that transition fully themselves?
That's up to BC Hydro. They're that third-party utility that's not controlled by the town. So BC Hydro comes up with a design for installing a connection. It has passed through our engineering staff for review because it's coming onto municipal boulevards and the work's happening on town property. So it has gone through engineering, but yeah, it's not up to the town as far as when BC Hydro replaces poles. I could find out more about that from engineering staff.
I guess what I'm getting at is I feel these people have been the unfortunate first people who've discovered kind of a problem with just our infrastructure modernization entirely, that whoever gets to be the first one who runs into where things become difficult between transitioning between overhead to underground is going to have to bear the full cost of that, when actually it's something that should be distributed, and we don't currently. BC Hydro probably should be the one that would have a mechanism for that sort of cost recovery that obviously isn't in place. The town doesn't know about it, and we have no mechanism to do it either, and these unfortunate people have just highlighted that perhaps for BC Hydro. Okay, thank you. That helps me understand, though it doesn't help us solve it from the town's perspective. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions through you to staff. So in the presentation, the applicants mentioned, gave examples of other properties around Sydney where this, and they indicated that these were oversights. Is that the case? Were these oversights for whatever reason, that we didn't know that people were doing this, and then we found out later, or we only found out since they brought it to our attention.
Again, through the chair, the property at 10441 Albay that was given as an example of having a similar overhead connection, that one was an oversight. That happened during part of the COVID pandemic, so there was a lot else going on at the time. There was another property further down Albay Road, further east down Albay Road towards the terminus of the road, which the building permit started out as a renovation, and we cannot require underground service for a renovation. And then it just escalated, the scale of development escalated, so that one has an overhead service. And I believe 2 of the points indicated on the map shown by the applicant were the 2 single-family dwellings at Bowerbank and Resthaven, the southeast corner of Bowerbank and Resthaven. And that one did come to council as a variance application, because in that case, the property owner would have had to install 1 or 2 new power poles on the boulevard in order to do an underground connection, because the existing poles were already full in terms of service capability to neighboring properties. So again, it's really difficult to know what design BC Hydro will require until the question is asked.
Okay, thanks for that. And one more, just on the flood construction level. So there's an interesting point brought up by the applicant that we have these flood construction levels, and I know when we look at multifamily dwellings, we're always looking at where is all the utilities going to be and making provision that they're not. And so I wonder, while I understand the aesthetics of trying to put utilities underground and perhaps safety issues in the future as well, or not having to worry about loss of power and in storms and that sort of thing, I understand their point. It seems to make sense that if there is a concern about flood construction level, should we be maybe rethinking our requirement to put utilities underground in residences that are prone to that?
Again, through the chair, there's a lot of underground wiring in areas low to the ocean, low-lying areas. It's very common. BC Hydro would design it in a way that it would address that risk. The covenant that was referenced on title requires no electrical in the building below the required flood construction level. So that would be like a furnace or an electrical system or outlets, household wiring. We're not talking about BC Hydro infrastructure wiring. So that is a different story.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair. Through the staff, if I can. So at some point, we're starting on this block, and this is the first one that is underground wiring to this location. So we're essentially waiting for every other property that's adjacent to it to go to be redeveloped and be required to put underground wiring in as well. At what point does BC Hydro make a transition itself? Instead of putting up a pole, do they put in a ground-based box that everybody then has to feed their underground wiring to, or do we have to wait till all the redevelopment's done before that box is created? Thank you.
Through the chair, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. That would be something we could find out from BC Hydro and report back.
So if I may, Chair, so is there a point where we have an opportunity to say that people are putting in underground wiring and we're waiting for BC Hydro to put in a box and then they can connect to it? In the interim, we have to have some sort of a latitude that allows them to continue being connected to the grid until that point happens. Because essentially what it sounds like here is we have one homeowner that is taking the lead, and everybody else will get there when they get there, and they get to pay for that until the others get there. Is that what I'm understanding?
When there's new construction of a new dwelling, they have to meet the bylaw requirements in place at the time. So the other homes on the block, the other buildings, if they have overhead connections, they were likely built before the bylaw requirement was in place. And yet it'll take decades to have a whole block on the street go underground. It takes a very long time. But we are looking at that big picture here to eventually get everybody's connections underground so that in time, those poles can come down. If we allow new construction to connect overhead, it just adds that much more work down the road when we're trying to move everything underground.
Thank you. That gives me a much clearer picture.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, through you to staff. Staff, could a variance be granted with a reference until such time as BC Hydro provides upgrades in the area in the course of its own routine maintenance that would then require the resident of the day, the property owner of the day, to then revert away from the service pole to BC Hydro's renewed infrastructure?
Through the chair, council can put any condition you like on the variance. I'm not sure how enforceable that would be down the road and how it would be, a future property owner would be made aware of that decision by council. I don't know how we would enforce that over time.
So no covenant on title or no reference on title, the town could not make on title the property, making that a requirement?
There could be. We'd have to look into the effectiveness of that covenant as a tool of getting that work done in the future. I'm not sure if that's doable or not, but again, we could look into that and report back.
Thank you.
Mayor McNeil Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. I seem to recall there was an application, a development application last term, and it had to do with either water or wastewater service. And the decision for council, recommendation from staff, was whether or not the staff would, or the town would pay for the infrastructure improvement, and the applicant was only paying for their portion, or a portion of that infrastructure. And I don't know if it was a covenant or what it was that said future owners would be receiving service would pay the balance of that. So I'm sorry, I'll turn it.
I believe you're referring to that drainage connection where the town entered into, like, the owner wanted to enter into a latecomer agreement with the town, which the town can do for our own infrastructure, but we ended up front-ending it with the ability to recover from additional development in the area. That isn't available to us for something that isn't our infrastructure, and it's unfortunate Hydro doesn't have a similar program.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions from committee? No? Thank you to the committee, and thank you, Ms. Verhagen. And I'll look for a motion to the recommendation. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try this for discussion. Still not moving the recommendation, but moving that development variance permit application number DV 100361 proceed to public notification to property owners and occupants within 75 meters of the subject property, and that any responses be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of the development variance
Second.
application.
Okay. Would you like to motivate?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know that I'm motivating, to be honest. I think this is a suggestion to committee colleagues that may well give us some time here to get a few more answers from staff. And I'll acknowledge that there were questions this evening that weren't fronted to staff in advance, and so to give them the opportunity to maybe come back and provide some clarification on either some of the concepts or some of the questions that came forward this evening, to come back to council with those, but also to hear feedback from the neighbors, because we are receiving this insight from the applicant. You know, it would be nice to hear from the neighbors who may have concerns about either the appearance or practicality of a service pole long-term of this nature on their street, and I'd like to hear that feedback as well. So well, this may be viewed as encouraging to the applicants in this case. It's really about getting more information in my case, the suggestion, and trying to see if there's a means to move forward with this variance and protect yourselves from the expense of doing this on your own ultimately, but also looking to BC Hydro to help with some of the infrastructure costs longer term as they look to renew the infrastructure of this neighborhood in due course. So I'll yield there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and secondary, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I felt actually like this variance was quite straightforward. This is the kind of condition that variances are meant for, and I know why the staff makes the recommendation they do, because they have, you know, the paper trail showing that this was asked for at these different stages. However, when I look at the property and their feedback from TELUS, their feedback from BC Hydro, and the fact that they would be needing to alter a neighbor's property in order to do what was requested as well, this seems like, you know, exactly the kind of thing that a variance is made for. And we know that part of the issue is that it's part of a much longer term strategy that all the properties in town and BC Hydro will have to coordinate with. And there's an issue about what happens in the future when these go underground. But I'm going to suggest that this property is not going to be the only one that's going to run into this kind of problem, you know, when or if we get around to looking at those kind of things. And I would like to use this as an opportunity to get better clarification and kind of long-term thoughts on this from Hydro and TELUS, and perhaps their better communication with municipalities, because I just wonder what the objectives are here when we're doing these things. If it's pure aesthetics, this seems less, this isn't that bad. And if it's about resilience, it sounds they brought up very good reasons why moving that TELUS might not be the best idea. And I know people who lived in Christchurch who, when the ground liquefied, all the power went out. It wasn't any safer underground if the ground is shaking. So it's all, I think this is one of those things where we're going to be having to get a better clarity on where there are satisficing conditions, and where we actually want to get at what the objectives are, rather than the spirit of the law that's within our policy ambit and what variances are for, rather than simply following the letter. So I'm more than happy to go with a variance here, and I think that many property owners looking at this and thinking, if this happened to me, what would I want to happen, would feel very similarly. Thank you.
Anybody else like to say? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you. I'll support the motion with the intention of wanting to hear from residents and nearby adjacent residents, and possibly through some of the questions from colleagues that we might have some additional information. But I think we have the important information before us tonight through the presentation, through the Q&A with the applicant and with staff. Where this begins to turn is the condition in the building permit to place the electrical service and communication service underground to the nearest acceptable BC Hydro pole. And our intention of the town's intention of that is nearest acceptable BC Hydro pole would be, my understanding would be nearest existing BC Hydro pole. We can understand from the applicant that the house, the residence that was on the property previously, had a pole just like it does now, located in a slightly different location. However, the applicants indicated that they have built some homes in the past, and they've consulted building regulations and the building permit conditions, and it would have been helpful at the time to have had a discussion with staff in terms of clarifying what nearest acceptable BC Hydro pole was. But we can understand that there was a BC acceptable hydro pole looking very similar to this one and slightly relocated. So at the same time, the applicant will know on that street, as they made reference tonight, we didn't see the photograph, but at the end of the street there was a subdivision and there's 6 homes with underground service. And as Ms. Verhagen indicated, we've done some 275 of these applications for single and 2 family rebuilds in our redevelopments in our communities. So, you know, there are aspects on both sides. The applicant has spent money on this pole and service that was there that could have gone towards underground service if that nearest acceptable BC hydro pole had been clarified at the outset of the building permit. Then there's the situation with regards to the larger cost with upgrading the infrastructure to be able to accommodate this single residence. And I begin to have concerns. I don't know what dollar amount you start to have concerns, but you start to have concerns when an applicant has to pay for, a single applicant has to pay for infrastructure that is, replacement infrastructure that is going to be benefit to others. And I was a little disappointed with the question through the staff, but we're understanding that while there is a latecomer charge or whatever that process is with regards to town-owned infrastructure, there unfortunately is not that option with BC Hydro service, because I think that would be a reasonable route to go in this case. And so in terms of what would I expect from the feedback from the neighbors, given that there's been a pole there for quite some time with the previous residents, I'm not sure that there's going to be concern, but it is a reasonable process for us to give notice, to go to the residents and hear back from them, and any other information, any information we might have. I'll leave my remarks there. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support the motion. I think there's additional information that I'd be interested in looking at. I'm interested in looking at the exact wording of the in the condition in terms of the nearest acceptable BC hydro pole and how we define that, because BC Hydro, I would think, are the ones to determine if a pole is acceptable or not. It didn't say that it had to be an existing pole. It just had, is my understanding, it needed to be an acceptable BC Hydro pole. And so they put up a pole and is acceptable to BC Hydro. So I need a bit more clarification from staff on what that wording is. Also, I think it's great to hear from the neighbors. It sounds like they're going to be impacted significantly, so I think that's good to hear from. And in terms of hydro's infrastructure, BC Hydro had a session for municipalities a couple months ago. Councillor Novick and myself attended that, and one of the things that we talked about was with the new provincial legislation and potentially more densification in neighborhoods and additional development, we talked about the need for additional hydro infrastructure. And an issue that was identified at that time is that they don't currently have a process in place, like for newcomers agreements or DCCs or some sort of method to distribute the cost of these things. So they acknowledged that that was an issue, and that they heard from the municipal people in the room that that's something that maybe should need a look at. So I think this is, you know, as we expect to see more of this sort of development in our neighborhoods, with our older houses being torn down and maybe having a retirement home or maybe having a fourplex or whatever put on. I think now seems to be a good time to be digging into these situations a bit more and figuring out what makes sense in this context for this sort of thing in terms of the underground wiring. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I do support the motion. Just I like to hear from the neighbors as well. The only concern I have is, as the applicant acknowledged, that as an oversight on their part, is that when there is a building permit and you're signing it like it's an agreement. And my concern is if this could become something that other people do as well. And just saying there was an oversight. I fully believe that it was an oversight on your part, but I have concerns in that aspect, because the onus is on the person who's applying to look through the document and read it before they sign it. And so I want to make sure that going forward that this doesn't become something that other people might use if they happen to watch this video or find out that this was allowed or granted, and follow a pattern where maybe it doesn't work the way it should, but we have a process for a reason. So that's my one concern, but I do support the motion put forward. Thank you, Chair.
I have just a couple of quick comments. I'll support the motion. I would note that the applicant has indeed made an underground connection to that supplementary hydro pole, but it's an underground connection nonetheless. It might not be the one that the town was hoping for, but it's definitely there. I find it unusual, or perhaps I find it interesting, that BC Hydro would have no problems making an overhead connection to that supplementary pole, yet demand that their entire infrastructure be replaced if it were to be an underground connection. I would think that the wiring would be the same. I'm not an electrician, so I don't really know that, but I assume that the wire capacity has to be substantial in both cases. I see it as a bit of an opportunistic grab by BC Hydro to get their infrastructure changed. Whether or not they're going to change that pole on their own remains to be seen. But if they don't, then I think it would support that idea. So I'm quite happy to see this go to the neighborhood and see what they think, and in the meantime gives us a chance to do a little bit of research and see what can be done to accommodate these folks. Any other comments before we call the question? None? We'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Burchick. We will move to item 7B, which is Development Permit Application number DP 100848 and Development Variance Permit Application number DV 100360 for 9895 and 9899 7th Street to relax requirements for minimum front and rear setback, maximum projection of cladding into setback areas, maximum parking area, and location of 3-bedroom units in order to allow the form and character of a 4-story multi-unit residential development. We will hear first from the applicant, Robert Pringle. Please come forward. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having us today. As you noted, we are here to talk about 9895 and 9899 7th Street. So, try and make this very quick. So here we are. Here's the subject property in the town, as you'll note, right on 7th Street, across from Sydney Elementary School. Here is the proposed development in the small orange square. Right next to it, we have a large development that goes through 7th to Resthaven, as well as the large 4-story condominium on the corner of 7th and Breath Hour, as well as the older apartment buildings on James White Boulevard. So as you can see the context, we do have a lot of larger scale developments around. This is a 4-story proposed development, which fits with the neighborhood. Here's the site plan. So as you can see, we are primarily using, or I should say solely using, surface parking. We've got our lobby up front, as well as the mechanical, electrical, garbage service rooms, as well as a large bike room at the back, as well as our elevator and our stair course. You'll note that we've got some intensive landscaping in the side yards, in the rear yard as well. We do include the large tree in the bottom right-hand corner of the property, as well as some really nice landscape frontage. This is an image of the typical floor plate. So we have 7 units per floor plate. As I mentioned before, this is a 4-story building. So we have 3 plates of 7 units, 21 units total. We have a mixture of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, as well as 3 bedrooms, as well as 5 adaptable 1-bedroom units. This is a rendering of the front elevation along 7th Street. You'll note the lobby in the bottom left corner, as well as the park gate entry, screening the parking behind so that it's not visible from the street. We have used a mixture of smooth fiber cement panels, trims, as well as corrugated metal for accent, as well as a number of wood look sidings to highlight it. Here's an image of the back of the property. These are the 3-bedroom units stacked above each other in the back corner. Again, we've used a mixture of corrugated metal sidings for accents, as well as lap siding. Another view of the other corner of the back. Here you'll note the surface parking below the building, screened again by the perimeter fencing, the landscaping, as well as the building again in front. And then another image of the front. As you'll note in the staff report, we are asking for 5 variances for this property. The first being a front yard setback reduction from 6 meters to 4.5. As you'll note in the neighborhood here, so the townhouse development to our south is currently also sitting at 4.5 meters. And then again, the new 4-story up at the corner on 7th and Breath Hour, its side yard setback is around 4.5 as well. So what we're trying to do is have a continuous, harmonious streetscape and not have our property pushed too far back. We are also seeking a reduction in the rear yard setback from 6 meters to 5.5. And again, going back to our floor plate here, you'll see it as a rather compact floor plate. Usable spaces, very nice units themselves, not too big, but not too small. So what we needed for the extra half meter is to use the 3-bedroom unit in the corner. Just requires a little bit more space in order to use 3 usable bedrooms, and that is the nature of that rear yard setback variance. Third variance we're requesting is the permitted projections into the front yards and side yard setbacks. Currently, these horizontal eaves are allowable projections into the setbacks. What is not allowable is the vertical connection between the two. It is considered cladding and therefore is reduced to 0.15 meters or 6 inches. So in order to give it the feature that we wanted to and really give it some definition, we require the vertical connection requires a variance. The fourth variance we're requesting is the parking area regulation. Currently the bylaw states that we can do 40% of the ground floor can be parking. We are requesting a variance to 62%. But as you can see, we're not really utilizing the ground floor, or sorry, the first story of the building. It is inherently a surface parking lot. And by hiding the parking, as I said, behind the frontage and tucking it under the building, we are screening it from the neighbors as well as from the street. And that is the nature of that, the variance request. So again, we're looking for 62%. And then the last variance that we're looking at is for the location of the 3-bedroom units. As you are aware, the bylaw requires the 3-bedroom units to be located on the 1st and 2nd floors. Our 1st floor does not have any residential suites. Our 2nd floor does. But what we've proposed is stacking the 3-bedroom units in the corner right above each other. This creates both efficiency during construction for plumbing walls, structure itself, as well as simplifies the floor plate and allows them to build it easier. So we are providing the three 3-bedroom units that were required, but we're just requesting the location. So yeah, I will, yeah, thank you. Just open it for questions.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thanks, Chair. Forgive me because I should know this, but the property to the north, is it a single-family dwelling?
Yes, it is.
And did the developer approach that property owner in its assembly process, looking to try and include that in the
I am not
development?
sure. I can't
Let's
say.
clarify that then. And it's not a process that's likely to. They're at the ADJOURNMENT stage. Thank you. I think that's all for the moment, Chair.
Anybody else? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. In regards to the adaptable units which you're providing, did I hear you say that 5 of the 5 are gonna be 1-bedroom units? Or will those 5 units be kind of allocated between the 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units?
Yes, you are correct. Sorry, the 5-bedroom, the 5 adaptable suites are 1-bedroom suites. Yes.
Okay, and I guess maybe I'll ask staff while we're on that topic, if I may, a question on the adaptable units. My understanding was that we usually spread out the adaptable units throughout, either 1, 2, or 3-bedroom. Is that the case, or does the developer have the option to allocate them as they wish?
Through the chair, there's no zoning bylaw requirement that the adaptable units be allocated across the unit types. It's just a
Okay.
required number of units.
Okay, so I guess my wish would be that you considered making some of them at least 2-bedroom units. Persons with disabilities who need access to those, they might have caregivers, they have family members, so they're looking for places where they can live with their family. So I would hope that you might give some consideration to that. In regards to the parking, I see that you've met the requirement for the number of parking spaces required. Will all of those be allocated to the units, or would you have any allocated for visitor parking?
Thank you. Very good question. We're actually exceeding the required amount of parking.
Yes.
And yes, there will be some visitor parking.
Okay, that's great, because one of my concerns is being right across from Sydney Elementary School and concerned about residents of the building and their visitors, taking up street parking and, yeah. And in terms of cooling system for the building, heat pumps, air conditioning, or other sorts of measures you're taking to mitigate heat buildup in some of those units?
At this time, we're planning on doing mini split units in the main living areas. So there will be, yes, air conditioning as well as heating.
Okay, great. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Councillor Granite.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pringle, for your presentation, and thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for asking one of my questions. Perfect. When I was looking at the plans, and this, I don't know if this is just me, but I found it odd that in a 2-bedroom unit, there'd be 2 bathrooms in terms of actual efficient use of space, and also looking at the, with the exception of the adaptable units, the 1-bedrooms having double sinks. So I was just wondering what the rationale or mindset for that was. And because you could use an extra space for storage or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good comment. Thank you. The double sinks for the 1-bedroom units was a direct request by the developer through their marketing research.
Okay.
And then the 2 bathrooms for the 2-bedroom unit, one of them is an ensuite, so it's directly for the master suite, or the primary bedroom, I should say. And then the second bathroom is available for everyone.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking in terms of the situation with housing, and I think the average person would just be happy with one bathroom if they had 2 bedrooms, but that's okay. The rationale makes sense to me now that you've explained it. And these may or may not be questions you can answer, but given that I know the space is, you know, relatively small and what you can build there, was there any consideration given to any kind of rental component for the building?
That I can't speak to, I'm sorry.
Okay. How about any kind of affordability component? Was that ever a consideration? Okay. And so another thing I was wondering when I looked at it is was there, my word of the night, consideration given to potentially having less density, not having 7 units per floor, but like maybe 6 or 5, and in that case you could actually bring the building in a bit and you wouldn't have to ask for a front and rear setback variance.
Well, you take off a unit, take off 3 units off the building, it just starts to make nonsense. For what we're asking, it's not a lot.
That does make sense from what perspective, if I don't mind asking?
You're going by the amount of units to sell, right? I can't say that taking units off makes a profitable building.
Thank you.
Sorry, point of order, if we could just request that the answers be provided at the mic. The meeting
Yeah.
is recorded, so we appreciate that colleagues can hear, but it's not a part of the meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, if I could speak to the question above the setback variance and, you know, the requesting them. It should be noted as well that we did begin the design of this building prior to the adoption of the new bylaw in the summer. So it was designed at that point before the application was actually made. And the pro forma was based on that design as well, so. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just one other question. Councillor Garnett made me think of when you're talking about, he's talking about the rationale for having 2 bathrooms in a 1-bedroom unit. I'm still not certain what the rationale is there, but when you talked about is based on your marketing analysis. So who do you anticipate marketing these to?
To clarify, the 2-bedroom unit has 2 bathrooms. The remaining units have 2 sinks in their bathrooms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So no, but in terms of marketing, so are you thinking, you know, families, retirees? When you were designing this and thinking about who's going to want this kind of format, who were you thinking of?
Prior to the marketing information being available to me, I was certainly designing this for young professional couples with, you know, here in the city, as well as people downsizing from larger homes in the community as well. I think the area, the neighborhood that it is in, it offers great walkability. The amenities of the school itself, right across the street, and everything within very nice walking distance. It's a really good spot. And so that was the idea. So we were trying to produce a quality unit in a really nice walkable area.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. You just spoke briefly about your target market being folks downsizing. I looked in at the floor plan of the first floor, and I see you've got bicycle storage, which is terrific, garbage room, mechanical, electrical, and a lobby. But I don't see any storage lockers. And for a couple that's downsizing, they're bound to have a lot more than might comfortably fit into a 1-bedroom or even a 2-bedroom apartment. What happened to the storage lockers that are typically in an apartment building?
Yeah, in this particular case, we have a very small footprint to deal with. So there was not enough space for the parking as well as any exterior or additional storage. So all of the storage would be within the units themselves. And that's, yeah, it was small footprint.
Okay, that's all for me. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just one question, and that's with regards to the parking and loading requirements in the max parking area within the first story of 40% of the floor area. Is the only, to meet that requirement in this particular development, is the only option to provide parking underground? If you were to meet that requirement?
Sorry, an underground parkade? Is that the question?
Sorry, how would you, what would you have to do? What would have to change in this development to meet the parking area requirement of only 40% of the first story?
If the design was to carry on like it is with surface parking, we would have to reduce the amount of parking in order to get to the 40%. So we would be deficient in parking.
Thank you.
Is anyone, no further questions, so is anyone prepared to move the recommendation? Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I'll ask for a report from Ms. Oh, I'm sorry, I went too quickly, sorry. At this point, we do allow public participation if anybody wishes to speak to this particular item on the agenda. I'll call for the first time if there's anybody who wishes to speak. Seeing none, I'll call for the second time if anybody wishes to speak. And the third time if anybody wishes to speak. And seeing none, we'll close the public participation. I went a bit out of order there. I put the questions before the public participation, but we'll get to the end sooner or later anyway. We'll now ask for the report from staff on this. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the chair, again, this is an application for a development permit for the form and character of this 4-story multi-unit residential building, and a variance permit application for 5 variances which were described by the applicant. Staff's reasons for supporting the variance requests are given in the staff report on page 5. Just to clarify a couple points of discussion during the last period of the meeting here, there's no bylaw requirement for storage units within a multi-unit residential building. I agree with the applicant that if they were to comply with the requirement for a max area of ground floor used for parking, it would mean eliminating parking spaces. I was just about to check the parking bylaw to see if this property is within the boundary for payment in lieu. I believe it is, but I would have to check. It's right on the line. So I will check that. If it is, then they could potentially pay in lieu for spaces instead of providing them. Yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. And through you to staff, Ms. Verhagen, I asked the applicant with respect to the property to the north, who in their rendering has it appear as a single family dwelling, that they've confirmed that they had approached the individual with perhaps the intent to include this as part of the land assembly. Did the OCP address anywhere the preferences around single lots remaining not congruent with development on either side? I know that discussion's taking place at APC, so I wanted to follow up with staff and check and see.
Through the chair, yes, I recall that discussion has happened at APC as well. I don't recall any specific policies in the OCP other than consideration should be given to development on adjacent properties, but we can check that and get back to council about that. If there is a specific policy or guideline in the OCP, I can check.
Thank you. I don't think this is a question for staff. It's just a comment in light of the presentation that we addressed previously on the agenda. I'm curious about the massive pole in front of the building now in the rendering. I'm assuming it's part lighting, part something else, but I'll leave that to staff. I don't think you can answer that. It's just, it's a curiosity. Staff, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I can't recall offhand. I'd have to look at the property and report back about what that pole is. It looks like a power pole to me, but I'd have to check. But it's important to note that we can't require a property owner to put the wires underground in front of their building. If they choose to, they can. BC Hydro does require certain setbacks from power lines and from those transformer boxes up on the pole to a building, but this building, I believe, would meet those BC Hydro requirements given the width of the boulevard plus the proposed front setback.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duck.
If it's okay, I'm prepared to move the recommendation.
If there's no other questions, Mayor Dale Smith first.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. Could staff speak to the intent of the loading and parking bylaw and having a maximum of 40% of the first story for parking? It sounds like while the applicant has indicated and staff have commented that the only option might be to reduce the parking requirement, and that would be by variance. There are other developments ranging in this number of units that do have underground parking. We certainly appreciate the cost of that, but is the intent of the 40% requirement to have more living space on the ground floor and thus have parking underground, because there would be no other location for it above ground?
And through the chair, yeah, the intent in the bylaw is to have actual building space with living space with inside uses fronting onto the street, so that there's a building at the ground floor and not just a building on stilts. This development has done a good job of addressing those ground floor uses and balancing out how much of, you can see on the screen here, how much of the front of the building at ground level, how much of the structure is taken up with parking versus the residential lobby. There is a ground floor presence of the building, and I think the architecture adds to that, which is why staff is supporting the variance application. It is nice to see residential units on the ground floor in the multifamily residential area, which is again why the bylaw requirement is there. But as you've pointed out, there is often a demand for parking. There's no bylaw requirement for visitor parking for apartment uses like this. But I think the applicant is trying to balance the two goals for the project, to provide residential units and to provide on-site parking, while still providing the service space, being the service rooms, the bike storage, the residential lobby, the stair accesses, all the code required elements of the building on the ground floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Duck?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the recommendation that the development permit application number DP 100845 and development variance permit application number DV 100358 for 9895 and 9899 7th Street be forwarded to Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Second?
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Go ahead, Councillor Duck.
Nothing to add.
Councillor Duncan?
No, I have nothing to add either. The only thing that I hadn't really liked about this application was the extent of shading on that one property, but that's not something that falls within a variance application. It is what it is. They asked the property if they would be part of the redevelopment, and there it be. Thanks.
Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A few comments, and thank you for providing the shadow study, because one of the things I actually was going to look for right away. And looking at it, seeing that for the vast majority of the year, that house to the north at 9903 7th Street will be in shade most of the time, if not all the time for certain months of the year. That's a concern for me. With the design, I'm also concerned about the 3 balconies on the northeast corner and how they look directly into their backyard. And so they're already losing light, and now will have limited privacy in their backyard. So those are just things that I saw that were a bit of a concern to me. And to the shadow study side of it, if the building was within the parameters of what's allowed in the zoning, it would provide more opportunity for some sun on the home if it was pushed back. So just something that I noticed when I was looking at it, having been out there. Another thing that I've been thinking about recently, and it's to do with a few of the other developments we've had with setbacks. And I reached out to Fire Chief Nicholson about, setbacks and variances for setbacks, and if there were concerns from a fire department perspective in terms of having less distance between homes. And he did concede that it would stretch resources based on potential for fires to spread more quickly. So that's something I now actually view variance of setbacks through, but it's a different perspective that I never thought of before. And I think it's a consideration that we need to take in when we're looking at these things. And staff does mention the fact that the intent of the increased setback is to align with OCP guidelines to achieve greater visual separation between multi-unit residential buildings, to provide more breaks in massing, and to allow for additional open space on a property. And they also note that the front and rear setbacks are designed to the previous zoning parameters, which the applicant mentioned, and how some of the other ones in that area are similar to that. And I would say that by having ones line up similarly, that's actually goes against what I read in the OCP in terms of breaks in massing. And I'm also concerned about less open space on the property. And I understand there's only 2 lots and there's a limited amount of space to work with here. But I do have concerns about giving variances for front and rear setbacks. And the front setback for me, that's 5 feet. That when you're coming closer, and I went up to the corner of and to the one next to the south and the one to the north, and it is imposing on the pedestrian traffic. At least that's my perspective. I think the reason we changed this zoning bylaw was to allow for that greater separation. And I just think I will support the recommendation because I absolutely want to hear what APC has to say about the design of the building. But I do have concerns around it. I think we went through this process, and granted that this building was designed, but we were intending to do this through our OCP and through our zoning. We were going to look at this, and it has been changed. And I do worry that for me, setbacks is a big deal, and the process spoke to that. And I think sometimes we overlook what the benefits of these distances mean, especially on the neighbors that are currently there. And there are 2 single-family homes on the back on 7th that will be developed potentially the same as this, and that's another less distance if they do this, if they ask for the same variance. So I'm trying to consider it in a more holistic way. The design of the building and the other variance requests I don't really have an issue with. For me, it's more the setbacks, but if APC's perspective is different, I'll weigh that into the decision further down the line. But just concerns I have at this point that I want to share with the rest of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other motivation? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak to the 5 variances. I don't have any concern with the variance request with regards to 3-bedroom units. I think the rationale the proponent has provided makes good sense. I think the what I'll call a very minor variance request for the exterior cladding, which is a very small portion of the building, but actually adds to the articulation of the building, is I certainly support. I do have a slight concern with the intent of our loading and parking bylaw to have 40% of the ground floor area as parking, to have more habitable space and uses. I appreciate the rationale the proponent has provided in the comments from staff in terms of the overall architecture. But again, we've gone through the OCP process and we've gone through the rezoning process, and sorry, that was the rezoning process. We did not revisit the loading and parking bylaw as we went through the OCP and the zoning bylaw. So I should make that distinction. But I'm willing to hear from APC on that. Where I do have my largest concern, as expressed by a colleague, is with regards to the front and rear setbacks. And that is, again, after the process we went through with the OCP and the process for the zoning bylaw. And I appreciate the remarks from the proponent that the pro forma was done prior to the passing of the zoning bylaw. However, that bylaw passed in June of last year. That's some 15 or 16 months ago, and the draft zoning bylaw was out perhaps a couple of months before that. So, and in terms of the rationale with the front setback, in terms of harmonious, it being continuous and being harmonious, I don't equate continuous frontages as necessarily being harmonious, partly from the massing and separation. But partly in response to, or partly because of wanting to provide additional open space. We are significantly densifying. It's on a gradual basis, but we're significantly densifying in our community. We've been experiencing that for about 10 years now, and the response from the community is that council has heard is that yes, let's continue to move forward in densification. But open space is important, and if we're going from two residences to 21 residences, I think open space is a consideration. And so I have a concern with that. I do want to speak to, because it hasn't been spoken to other than clearly in the staff report, that these properties along 7th Street are uniquely situated as they face the playing field of Sydney Elementary School. That's a reasonable rationale. I can do that. I don't know that that field is going to stay a field forever. At the beginning of last term, CAO and I met with the school board with regards to, you know, the potential future for that property, and it's not likely to stay an open area for forever. So I do have concern over the front setback. In terms of the rear setback and the rationale from the proponent in their letter, in terms of the floor plate, well, it's simply to increase the area of the 3-bedroom units. And given that this has been in place for 15 or 16 months, I think, you know, coming forward with a development that you know, that meets our current zoning bylaw in this particular respect is important. So, having heard from my colleagues, I'm likely to support this to go to APC, but I do have significant concerns with that on behalf of the community that has spoken through our OCP process. Thank you.
Anybody else? I have nothing to add, so I'll call the question. Motion on the floor, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for the presentation. We have no staff reports, and we have no other business, so I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Duck?
Second.
Second, Councillor, everybody seconded. All in favor? Thank you, and good evening, everyone.